Hello everyone. Today we will continue with the concept of with practical skills, learning some more practical skills. Last week what we did was to look at the concept of analogy. We, as discussed, it was shown that words don't have a object, symbol, meaning. Words come to us with entire histories that we have accumulated, and this particular cognitive scientist, Hofstadter, what he does, he actually produced a wonderful concept for us how we organize our vocabulary, and that's one way to look at it. How adequate or how accurate it is. It might not be an issue. What we want to actually point here that our words come with an entire network of concepts, which is exactly what gives us depth when we understand things. So here the scientists use the concept of hub. However, it could be love, and love will come with all kinds of concepts, and now depending on the context in which we participate or interact, different aspects of our meaning-making networks will be evoked. So we did that. Why did we look at meaning like this? Well, first of all, just to summarize, we were talking about learning being a process of change, and typically this change is conceptualized as changes in our meaning-making systems. So consequently the question is, what is meaning-making? And here this questions regarding this concept very often stop. Nobody is actually asking, but as a teacher or a true intellectual researcher, you should actually ask these questions so that you can have a complete network of framework of concepts and be actually conscious of what your concepts mean rather than simply move on. Why was it important to look at analogies as a metaphor for a better understanding of what meanings are? Well, we had to do that because the Australian curriculum has this complex structure, and the discipline-specific learning outcomes, according to our curriculum, and I actually agree with it, have very little meaning unless they are organized in a hierarchy, and this hierarchy in Australia implies that students understand discipline-specific concepts only when they can relate them to real-world context, and the real world is construed in the Australian curriculum in terms of personal and social capabilities, which is what does this that I'm learning have to do with the way I understand the world and myself in it. You can see, so this sort of process already counters traditional approaches to the curriculum where the students were learning only discipline-specific outcomes. They were not making this relationship with, so what? How does this relate to me as a person in the world? Not only that, but the second question that the Australian curriculum is asking is, and how this world that I am helped to construe is reflecting my ethical and my cultural values or principles. Is it challenging me? Is it broadening those? Or am I being stuck and thinking all the time within the paradigm of what my parents do? Forget the neighbors of the neighbors, forget the bigger world, right? So what's the true education power of the relationships that I'm helped to construe as I'm learning, for example, in our case, English or English language or any other language, I talk about literacy and language because these are my specialties. And another question that our curriculum wants our teachers to consider is that students do not learn discipline specific learning outcomes alone. They also need to create or better learn analytical skills in order for the students to be able to better understand why they attribute particular meanings to particular concepts. Why do they think texts mean a particular thing? What is it that they are missing? What tools would help them to better understand actually the kinds of world visions that the text is actually communicating, right? So what we had in the past, or a long time ago really, more than 100 years ago, what we had in the past was the understanding that a symbol or word means a particular thing. Now we are seeing that the words come with the words, right? The words come with the words. And Hofstadter helped us to actually see how words come with the words. Our Australian curriculum helps us better break down those different dimensions of those worlds and consider those when we actually design learning experiences for our students or our assessments. So that was last week. And we also looked a little bit at the analytical processes or tools that I started introducing you to. So that was good, and I don't want to deal with it from the same angle today, but I wanted to introduce you to some more tools. And one more sentence I wanted to add. Why is having a variety of tools important when we teach English literacy? So in an article that I've written with, co-written with our Darwin teacher, Miss Amy Norman, we tried to actually create a framework that would help us actually explicate how we work with the curriculum. So here you have a table which succinctly summarizes what I've just said until now, and the article, I will produce a reference for that paper. I'll just show you. So that's the reference. So that's a book, Challenges in Global Learning, and Amy and I produced a paper, that you can actually, I might make it bigger, so some of you might actually want to see it. So the book is available in Charles Darwin, in the Charles Darwin Library, so it's online, but also you can purchase it. So here we go, a dialogic evidence-based framework for integrating technology into school curricula. So what we did with Amy is to explain why having tools constructed from evidence-based, using evidence-based findings or conceptual frameworks that were developed based on research. But was it important actually to have such tools? Well, if we look, we wrote here, we talked here about children, but I don't even know why. We could have written students, we should have. So when it comes to social personal awareness, the way we actually framed it, it's important to have tools that allow students to interrogate the meaning value of what they learn in their disciplines in relation to how they the picture of the world they have in their heads. It's because children internalize their subjective interpretations of other people's beliefs, goals, feelings, and actions. So children internalize. So when you look into activities what's very important is actually to create activities that help students actually to explore or to break or to create an internal dialogue on the visions they have in their head, so that they can build an increasingly informed picture rather than just run with whatever they had always known. And when the perceptions which they have of the world and of themselves in it are not actually engaged, what happens? Students fossilize in those, and then lots of problems arise, including insensitivities or stresses of different kinds. So now, with the goal of cultural and ethical learning, here the idea was to have tools that enable students to, again, dialogize with the kinds of frameworks they have in their heads, so that they can explore the limitations, but also use those limitations or use the perceptions that they actually have to build new perceptions, right? So for us as researchers and a teacher to ask ourselves, do we have tools that enable this kind of cultural exploratory process? Regarding the critical and creative capabilities, we ask ourselves, what is the potential of the tools that we have developed? What kinds of forms of abstract thinking do they enable? So while the entire curriculum is about supporting transformative learning, now you can see that that's the ultimate goal, but we also ask ourselves about the qualities of the supportive tools that we design, and we did that by analyzing research and drawing from research the questions that would help us in an informed way produce a response to about the way in which we interpret and work with the curriculum. So we've committed so far quite a lot of energy to better understand how to work with posters, also with text, and I will come back to some of those, but I want to engage you in another exercise today, one of my favorites. So typically I actually start my teaching with this type of text, but we're almost at the end of the semester, and here we go. So let's have some fun and see what we can do with it. So here's a fable, right? It's a fable. We'll read it. In a field one summer's day, a grasshopper was hopping about, chirping and singing to its heart's content. An ant passed by, bearing along with great toil an ear of corn he was taking to the nest. "Why not come and chat with me," said the grasshopper, "instead of toiling and moiling in that way?" "I'm helping to lay up food for the winter," said the ant, "and recommend you do the same." "Why bother about winter," said the grasshopper, "we have got plenty of food at present." But the ant went on its way and continued its toil. When winter came, the grasshopper had no food and found itself dying of hunger, while it saw the ants distributing every day corn and grain from the stores they had collected in summer. Then the grasshopper knew it is best to prepare for the days of necessity. So we could actually create here, we could actually analyze this text using the concept of contrast groups, right? We've discussed it before and we played with it, so we will come back to it. But I wanted you to look at things a little bit differently. So here I'm coming to you with with a number of frameworks that I've developed over the years, or learned about, or developed myself, or put together in a way that is maybe creative and new. And let's have a look what we can get out of it. And the point why I'm saying to you is that there's a number of stuff lying around. I pulled a little bit of information from here, a little bit of information from there, and actually created my own model of analysis, is to show you that it's not that there is this big method that the whole Australia or the whole world has to learn, otherwise all students will fail. What there is actually your informed innovation. Do what you understand and know what makes you understand your method, right? So I produced a little bit of a discussion on where I got my why I'm doing all of these things. You should have your own as well. That's how you proceed all your discussions to the auditors or to the school principal, to whoever needs to know why you do the things you do, and feel comfortable. One of the things I was thinking today is a signature of an experienced teacher is not that they do or apply the same method, the holy method that everybody has to use. Every 50 years we have a new method, like a new religion. We change religions in education, except that underneath it's the same principle all the time. So that's so in some way nothing is changing. But it's not that an experienced teacher is better and faster at it. An experienced teacher is relaxed. Is relaxed not because they can just apply the same method all the time, but because they learned what actually matters. And we will talk about that detail another day, maybe in a week, because I don't want to cram everything into today's class. But what really matters is what we had in our tutorial 2 and maybe later on too. Exploration, discussion, getting things out of people, helping them make explicate or articulate what they got out of the class, and compare and contrast. Are we all on the same page? Do we agree? And you can see this sort of when you were doing your readings for assignments, you also learned that it is these open questions, but not open questions, but these explorations and discussions is what actually supports true learning, right? So one of the questions I asked you last week was to challenge you. How do you know or learn how to keep the discussion going? And it's very important, because asking open questions might actually be a closure too. Oh, children, what do you think about this? Oh, I think this woman is good. So what do you think about it is an open question. Now you got the answer. I think this lady is great. And then if you don't know how to dig deeper, stir longer the discussion, if you have no tools, then it dies there. So an open question alone doesn't fix or doesn't support exploration. So let's have some play here. And some of the things I will show you, you already have learned from me, and some of the things you already knew, but didn't think probably, but you could apply them here for analyzing and learning how texts are created, and having a better understanding of how to understand what authors are doing to the audience, so that you can actually create a conscious reader. So lovely fable, old fable, God knows how old it is, right? So every European who finished in a school, whatever level of school, would swear to you that this is Aesop fable created in Greece. But actually, if you talk to Indian people, they tell you that it was their fable. So these stories are as long or as old as humanity, right? So there's probably nobody who owns them. Okay, so if you wanted, so let's have a look at the way how I divide texts. We might later on talk also, don't know about today, but someday we should talk, why is this method of dividing the text superior? Maybe I'll just show you a little bit, if I can find a slide easily. Sometimes it's hard to find slides quickly when you need to. I just happen to have found one. So basically, when I use the typical systemic functional linguistics model of actually dividing the text, you can see we have orientation that goes on for many sentences. which is a little bit troubling. While it may work for the linguist, I am not sure whether there is enough of guiding support in this approach to help students actually to create orientation, right? So I'm now drawing the distinction between what how the linguist looks at the text and how the pedagogue should look at the text. Then we have this, and then we have a record, which is what happened in the story, right? Look how long it is, right? So the story goes on like this. So it's a lot of sentences. Now students may ask you, how the heck do we create it? How do we know we have a proper order in it? Well, you don't, nothing actually emerges from this paragraph to give students some structure. But if you look at my method, with the focus, I kept probably all the way. So I kept the paragraph here, just like they did for orientation. But in order to distinguish between focus and disturbance, we are looking at, so what happened in this context, how the situation has changed. So then we have a perspective on the problem, and look at that. We had disturbance here, the first one, and then we have a disturbance again, and then dialogue development, and then we have disturbance again. You see the structure of a story, and then we have a disturbance again, dialogue development. So what we're looking here, when we use my structure, is how the story actually develops, and how what first seemed to be the problem that people encountered, how it generated new problems, and then how people reacted to this. So what we have here, it's a more divided text that helps students to actually guide students probably better. I don't know, we can test it even further. I mean, there's more research needed to be done on this approach than so far we have done. But yes, so I like it. It's more fine-grained, it's more supportive. There's more detail in this in my approach, which allows students to organize the bits and pieces of the text better. So that's one thing here. I looked at this Aboriginal text. I've analyzed lots of text together with my doctoral students. So you've got one disturbance, then you go through the structure, and then there's another one. And do we have another one? Yes, there's another one, right? You can see before the resolution comes. So fine-grained analysis, and I like it, and maybe you will too if you work with it one day, or if I convince you to it throughout the rest of the semester. So we've got these things, but this is, so I just pointed it out to you. It wasn't what I wanted to show you. So you might have learned in your former lives as students, at school or wherever, that a simple technique of crossing out bits and pieces of sentences help you identify what is it in the sentence that needed to be there, and what is in the sentence that we could have gotten rid of. And the question is not this. The question really is, if there are bits and pieces in the sentence that we could get rid of, and the sentence still would have been grammatically correct, why the heck did the author keep those words in the text? Why? Maybe because, what do you think? Maybe because they were very important in order to make the story have the desired effect, communicative effect. So let's have a look at the first sentence. I'm not sure whether I'll have a time to do all of them. I would strongly invite you to actually, when you analyze text, to maybe look at this one and go through this text. It's not long, but let's have a look. So we're starting with, in a field one summer's day. right? We could get rid of it. A grasshopper was hopping about. An ant passed by. I mean, perfectly good sentence, perfectly good text. In fact, I bet you that a lot of sixth graders are producing texts like this. In fact, I analyzed some of NAPLAN texts, and that's exactly what was happening there. And that troubled me. Why? Because I feel that the way we teach literacy in schools, we forget that a grasshopper hopping about and then pass by, while it is grammatically correct text and it communicates some meaning, you could actually draw it. It's exactly what's happening here. But it fails to produce relevant information for people to actually feel the impact of a story. Right? So that's my argument, and that's my concern about NAPLAN text. I don't think this semester is long enough for you to actually show you all my work and all my concerns. Maybe once we finish in week 13 for those who want to have an extra class. Anyway, so let's have a look. What do we have here? The first word, the first phrase or chunk, in a field. How important it is here to actually use that phrase. So since no students showed up today to the online class, I'll just have to actually draw on the discussions I had with undergraduate students studying literacy, English literacy for classroom, and give you examples. So we had a student who said, well, we didn't have to have it. It absolutely contributes nothing to the story. Absolutely nothing. Now you ask yourself, this is a good proposal because you really want this attitude in a student who says, well, if I got rid of it altogether, let's get rid of it altogether. But there's another technique, it has a better word in linguistics, but for the world of it, I keep forgetting this word all the time. So I call it substitution exercise. So in a field, we could just eliminate and see whether it actually works. And you could read the story while removing all those bits and pieces which I crossed out, including the field. But you could also maybe substitute it with the miller's shed, right? In a miller's shed one summer's day. Is it all right? Will it work? And typically when I talk to my undergraduate students who are way above 5 years old, the discussion takes 3 hours. So you can see how much work you can do in this text, and you'll ask yourself, oh, what the heck, I don't have 3 hours, I have one class, I have to perform in front of my mentor teacher. No. In a field, you can work with it in many different ways, analyzing the value of this phrase here. You wrote in your assignments, you're concerned about grammar. You could also not only talk about the meaning of it, but what it is. It's a phrasal, it's an adverbial phrase, pardon me. We could talk about what it consists of, what does the field symbolize? What does the field symbolize? If you say, well, it's just that terrain, yes, if you look at it from the perspective word object, but look at the field from the perspective of emotion. Field, when it's summer, is it nice to be in a field? By all means, everybody's running to the fields, right? For picnic, nobody wants to stay in the house, everybody is going to the field. But why don't they go to the field in winter? So you can have these discussions, maybe not necessarily instantly like I'm having with you here. Maybe you can actually go through this sort of model after you finish with students, the analysis, and you leave actually inside of the text the words that students actually felt have to be in the text, right? Then you can then copy the slide, paste it here again now, and so here you remove all the things that students decided that in the field can go, summer is all right, and you can then actually go to this tool of analysis, which we've done now for so many weeks, and create these groups and groups of meanings, create the contrast and see what contrasts with what and how meaningful it is. So let's have a look here. I will just speed up through it because I want you to see the value of it. And when you become one day a mentor teacher or experienced teacher, what will happen? You relax, you will know that you can connect in a field with emotions. You can also discuss grammar here. What else could you discuss? Any idea? 1, 2, 3. It's hard, right? It's hard to invent everything on your own. That's why we have culture that passes on its goodies to the next generation. For example, why is it at the front of a sentence? Like, why? Why couldn't it be at the end? Why are particular phrases right at the front of a sentence? Those may be adverbial phrases. Where? In a field. Why are they at the front of a sentence? Well, one thing that you might know is actually that what is the most important? It's always at the start of your sentence in English. I don't know whether it's in every language. Sometimes we say that Chomsky built the world grammar based on English, so I don't want to do it. But when I see that my Indonesian doctoral students put the main stress of a sentence in the middle somewhere, so I don't know Indonesian, I wonder whether in Indonesian the main bit is in the middle. I don't know. I'd have to do some comparative analysis, and some of my Indonesian doctoral students might actually do this just to see whether this would help them. Either way, in a field, grammar, why is it at the front of a sentence? How would we say it? In a field, one summer's day, a grasshopper was hopping about. So in a field is like right at the top. If you actually recorded the intonation pattern of this sentence, in a field would be actually falling. Intonation would be falling as they do in English, and in a field would not be jarring with the falling pattern of the intonation, right? So you can do actually a lot of things here of analysis, but in a field. So what we learned was that if we were to talk about groups, I've got groups somewhere here. I've got groups here analyzed. Where are my groups? I had a better slide for the groups, but I can't find it. Like I've got 5,000 PowerPoints, and when you need one, you obviously can't find it. So here are my group. So this is really badly done, just badly edited, right? So what we have, I wrote context here, but what we have here, another group, it could be, a contrast, summer, winter, right? Summer, winter. Then we have grasshopper in summer, then we have a grasshopper in winter, then we have an ant in summer, then we have an ant in winter. You could actually create those groups and contrast with your students to analyze what's happening. But when we have we contrasted grasshopper and summer, grasshopper in winter. We contrasted ant in summer and the ant in winter. Why don't we contrast the field with anything else? Now I know you will tell me, because Ania, everything is happening in the field. Well, as you know, people who write these amazing fables, they actually are really good at writing. So if we wrote here in the miller's shed, it's like, what's the miller's shed to do with the ant and the grasshopper hopping, right? So you think, the grasshopper to hop, it has to be in a field. Oh yeah, you're correct. But I will push you here. This is my interpretation, and you allow your students, I would suggest, to build their own until they come up with understandings or interpretations that are very convincing, right? That they can actually defend. So this is how I defend the need for inner field. Well, field is a great place, as I said, for picnic in summer, but it's a horrible place to spend winter in it, right? Whether day or night. You really don't want to be in an open field in winter, especially with no food, right? I'm not sure, a lot of my students live in the tropics, so they may not actually feel it, but I was born in Poland, and winter in an open field, when it's not just snowing, that's the least of a problem. When it's windy, it's a horrible place. So there you go. So we have here a field to show its flippant nature, right? One day good, next day not so good, right? So the context here is set up not just by summer. In fact, summer, it's not the context. Well, it is, but it isn't. It's already contrasting situations. But the real context here, in my view, is the field. The field which is the joy and danger, right? So the question of the fable was, if we were to create a synthesis of it, so what was it, the joy and danger? Yeah, so the story is about how it's about the ambivalence of the field, right? Not always a joy and not always a danger. How do we, as humans, as civilization, or as living creatures, prepare? So, right. So it's a lovely story. So grasshoppers, I trust, in Northern Europe, I don't know about India, they die, I presume. So using this natural cycle of the grasshopper, the author of this fable transformed it into a metaphor that describes someone who actually can't think ahead, doesn't prepare for the future or for the days of necessity or for future. So if the text was a grasshopper was hopping about and an ant passed by, would have been great, but it wouldn't set up the tension which you may have not thought you felt when I started to read this text in a field one summer's day. But what you think you heard and what your body actually heard are not necessarily the same thing, right? Intuitively, like when you ride a bicycle, right? Intuitively, your body knows what field means. But now when we're talking about it, I have to train you. I have to make it explicit. Or I don't want to now to end up with this explicit teaching method. I didn't make it explicit straight away. I had a discussion with you before we have come up with an interpretation that we could defend, right? So explication comes at the end. This is what we came up with. We articulated our understanding. We can defend it, right? So now we have articulated it, but in order to articulate it, we had to explore. So in a field, your body feels what it means, your mind might not. We need analysis in order for the mind to dig deep into your emotions, because emotions are inside of your body, they regulate you. So now we had a discussion to dig deep, and your emotional circles, or whatever they are called, they said, oh my God, feel good sometimes, feel bad sometimes. Right, so we did that. Let's look at, I'm not saying that all the things I crossed out well. It doesn't matter. We're analyzing, we're playing with the text, not in order to find the proper interpretation, but to identify what, to make our interpretation better informed, right? So that's the point of exploration. What do we have here? Why not come and chat with me, said the grasshopper, instead of toiling and moiling. Why did the grasshopper have to set up this contrast, right? The grasshopper could have easily said, why not come and chat with me? I mean, it's obvious that the grasshopper is inviting the ant to interrupt its activities and actually have some fun. So why the heck double down on this on this request and contrast it now with relaxation? Come and chat with me with instead of toiling and moiling. Why the heck is that phrase there? So you can have a discussion what this phrase adds to the text. And what it does add is a clear disrespect of not just not appreciation, maybe, I don't know, maybe not disrespect, but clear not appreciation by the grasshopper, not valuing. And it is a bit disrespectful, because he says, it doesn't say, the grasshopper doesn't say, instead of working so hard, which would be neutral, uses emotionally loaded words, toiling and moiling. Why are you just toiling and moiling? You could explore context using Google or using linguistic corpus. You could actually Google those, or I might provide me website links to those next time. So you could Google the context of those words for students to actually get the understanding, not only that toiling means really hard labor, struggling, but the rhyming here, toiling and moiling, is again used to emphasize. So you could actually now with students explore the context of those words, with which other words and in what text these words appear. You could actually explore the literary device that this kind of rhyming is actually employing. So there's a lot of, and also that these are present participles. So there's a lot of work you can do, but you can see while you're looking at different grammatical structures, you're looking at collocations, you're looking at emotions, you're looking also at emotions and the kinds of emotional impacts that different literary devices actually create. You're doing a lot of disciplinary learning outcomes, but because you don't treat them in isolation, instead you treat them, first of all, you explore them with the students through open discussions. You enable students to explore their own understandings, and we can call it of the world, but of the world they have in their head, and compare it how this author or other texts actually construct or use those words or use those grammatical structures, right? So the world of a child is actually expanding as a result. So doing this kind of analysis is very useful for students or for children to engage more thoughtfully or intellectually and culturally in the text. Now I have here one thing more I wanted to show you, which is so when the winter came, the grasshopper had no food and found itself dying of hunger. Again, that should have done the job. Yet we have this long sentence here. So what does it say? Look at the words there, how emotionally loaded they are. So here he wasn't just seeing the ants distributing the food they had collected in the summer. He was seeing them doing this every day, right? Even that every day was critical in this sentence. So every word has its place here for a reason. Every day you could be hungry by looking at people. You could be even more hungry. When you're hungry and you look at other people eating, that increases your pain. But when you do it every day, so what we're learning here with the students, we're learning a lot of things that is happening in the text, and especially we're learning that those phrases which are around the core sentence, which makes a sentence grammatical, right? They're important, they're there for a reason. And the goal of us wanting the students to see these things is not only to analyze text and appreciate better or interpret them better, but also when they write to actually move away from just the core bare skeleton of a text. Grasshopper was helping, the ant came, the ant didn't want to play, grasshopper died, right? So this is what the NAPLAN tests look like. I'm not saying all NAPLAN tests have texts of this kind written by the students, but the ones that I actually looked at, because they were actually mentioned in articles written by linguists, right? So that's what I saw. And on top of it, the systemic functional linguists were not actually too upset about it, right? They focused on other things they felt that mattered, but text is made of the kinds of meaning-making contrasts that authors use, and those contrasts create groups. So here's the ant working in summer, here's the ant living, doing whatever in winter, here's the grasshopper in summer, and here's the grasshopper in winter, and all of those different groups that are contrasting with one another, we can actually put in a circle, and the circle would represent the field. So all references to the field, to the summer, or references to pain and maybe even disrespect are extremely important in our text. So you can now, after you had this discussion, you can see that this is the unique element, grouping, contrast, contrast too. They are filled. Those slots are filled, but with the text, which was about the car poster, right? So I just included this particular table with references to this poster because I wanted you to remember that that's where it is from, right? So you could actually now, unique elements, so what is it? It's a fable, right? So generic structure is the fable, and the unique element is what's the message of it, right? So what's the message? We could look into the resolution, or we could look into the moral, right? And we could actually say what the fable was actually teaching us, and then we can discuss the contrasting groups and so on. Now, you may ask me, why the heck do this analysis? Or you might be actually convinced that, maybe I have convinced you that doing this crossing out of elements and reflection is extremely important. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Now, that was a fable. It was produced for children or for adults, for everybody who wants to actually find pleasure in reading a fable. So it was produced for the audience out there, for the world, if you like, right? It wasn't produced for children. It wasn't a pedagogic text created by the teacher at night so that tomorrow she can teach, or he can teach, adverbs, right? It wasn't that. However, I took this text from Mary Kalantzis and her husband, I can't remember, Bill, I don't remember his name. But anyway, Mary Kalantzis has this book written, depending on which edition you're looking at. So one is written with her husband, and another one is written with some other scholars. So 2016 is written with some more scholars, since Mary migrated to the US. Anyway, so here's a text that the teacher created using the genre pedagogy created with children. And I could be wrong. They called it in the textbook by Mary, so they called it's a scientific report or science report. And I looked at this text and I could find very few things I could actually get, cross out in this text, which you could ask yourself, why? Because it is about science and scientific reports are dry. So that's the question. If you were a linguist, or if you were like me, a pedagogue that uses not just linguistics but also other disciplines, like for example semiotics and neuroscience, I don't know what else I use. Who knows? By the time you get so deep into it, you don't even remember. Maybe it was the physics that gave me an idea. You just don't know. That, what is it called? Schrodinger's cat. You never know. You never know what's happening. Anyway, this is a joke. Jokes aside, maybe you want to actually explore yourself. or yourselves what scientific reports look like and whether truly there's stuff to be thrown out. So now we're talking about authentic text and a text produced by the teacher, whether with students in class or by herself or himself. Either way, it's a pedagogic text. And the problem with pedagogic texts very often is that they are so biased towards a particular thing, whatever that objective is, whatever that particular discipline-specific learning outcome is that they actually focused on, that they forgot that student's job is not to actually learn a single outcome, but to relate it to the world and themselves in it, to relate to the culture and ethics, to relate also to what they know, how text can be analyzed. So abstract relationships in the text, what kind of concepts there are, what kind of meaning groups, what is contrasted, all of those things. So that's the difference. When we write an authentic text, for example, we want to insult someone, oh my God, we can use words, and all of them are superfluous. Our text could actually get rid of them all. So, right. So when we have an authentic text, like with the fable, we have a lot of things there that a linguist might say, well, they are not necessary. But if you actually communicate and want to convince people, you actually want to act on their emotions, and consequently you put stuff there, not that it's superfluous, but in fact without that stuff the text loses its meaning. Let's call it this way, just for the shortcuts sake. So here I have nothing here, right? So I ask myself, is this a scientific report or does it read more like encyclopedic entry? A whale is a sea mammal. Sea mammals live in the sea. Sea mammals are long. Sea mammals have children. They give birth to children like human beings. They have this, they have that, they have that. So to me, it reads more like an encyclopedic entry. Think for yourselves what you think. I will show you a scientific report that I found and worked with. I don't remember with how many students by now, but here it is. I'm not sure whether it is that visible because okay, so what do we have here? We don't have there is a title probably in this text, but this title begins with this sentence. Anyone needing a little excitement in their lives could do worse than suck a lemon. A surprising new research at the University of Sussex. Now they do have a title, some sort of formal title to this particular thing, but underneath the title, and they have a title, they have a short abstract, and then they have this thing. Anyone needing a little excitement. Now, you can turn off that or stop the computer, or stop the video, and before I tell you what it is, you can think to yourself, why the heck put this sentence? So they have a title there. If you really don't believe me, let's have a look. I have a very slow connection. There's a reason for it why I have a slow connection. Because I have to use my mobile phone, because if I use the hotel's room thing, okay. When life gives you lemons, you take more risks. All right, that's the title. It's a website which is actually probably, so it's called neurosciencenews.com, and it produces articles on neurology, psychology, AI, blah blah blah, everything. And for people like me, maybe you too, for people who don't actually do research in neuroscience, to actually getting updated on what's happening out there. So you have a summary, which is the abstract, you have a title, and then you have this thing. Right, so you can analyze for yourself first, before I give you my answer. What is it? Is it the focus? Is it the disturbance or the problem? Is it the dialogic stage where you talk about the problem? Right? Think to yourself. Well, what I'm saying is I taught you the canonical structure of the text, but now experienced people can actually play with the structure of the text in order to achieve the communicative effect that they desire. And when you do, for example, when you write articles of this kind, like this one, for the broader audience, like for people like me, so what do you want to do? You don't want to put scientists at the Sussex Computer Human Interaction Lab. It's long. You look at it and you fall asleep. They want to put an attention grabber, right? But not just any attention grabber like click here and you'll be smarter. So what they did here, they actually put the moral of the text. Yes, scientific reports have a moral. Remember my thesis? All texts have a moral, even a recipe. I spoke about it, I'm not going to talk about it now. All texts have a moral. So what they did, they took the moral of the text and flagged it right there at the front. If you look at podcasts do that too, right? So I'm not sure whether you're fluent at podcasting. I not only actually produce my own, I could do them better, but podcasts, podcasters who actually record their podcast and then upload it, so it's not actually presented live. What they do, they take a piece of a dialogue they had or interview they had with someone, and this little piece which is really pointing to the core of the podcast or attracts attention, they put it right there at the front, right? So taking the moral from underneath the text, or maybe it is still there, I don't know, I'm not gonna now look for it, but taking the moral of a story and actually putting it right at the front has its role, and the role is for people to see, so what's the moral of this text? What is it that I'm to learn from it, right? Because moral teaches you, right? So what is it that I'm to learn from this particular scientific report, and therefore I should read further? Or maybe not read further anymore, but learn at least the moral. So it is right there. But look at this here. All these things which are in black are things that didn't need to be in those sentences. A sentence, scientists say they have found evidence that sour tastes lead to more risk-taking behavior. Perfectly good sentence. So why the heck did they put the Sussex Computer Human Interaction Lab? Right? Why? And why did they put in a paper published and published in scientific reports, for example? And why did they say the word today? So these are the sort of conversations you want to have with your students, to vote with them. If we were to rewrite this text, what would we leave in and what would we leave out? And then when we actually compare what would we leave in and leave out, what we could do is take these two texts and give to independent readers. So say if we work with children or students from grade 6, we give them to grade 12. And they will look at it and give us feedback. And then we could learn. What the heck did we miss? But because we don't have this process and we don't have the time for this process, I'll just give you my interpretation. Well, first of all, not any scientist, not a scientist from university or from no university or whatever. Anyone can call themselves a scientist. So basically, they named the institution, right? In order to make their reporting credible. It wasn't just some small thing, it was something that actually has a name and it talks about human interaction. So maybe it's something sort of like credible. So in order to actually give credibility to the reporting of those scientists, they put the name of the lab. Right? What else did they do? For the first time. Say they found for the first time. Why did they have to say it? We already knew it was for the first time because they said that they have found evidence. And does it matter to you whether it's first time or second time? It's not like you are engaging in reading the history of science. So ask yourselves, why the heck did they put it for the first time? And talk to students. It's what it gives you, like, if you know that and you go to the party and you tell other people, then like, oh my god, It's really, like, so it compels you. It has this compelling effect on you. Read it. It's cool. It's a new thing. It has never been done before. Not only that they've done research, they've collected empirical evidence. So it wasn't just theoretical hypothesis making. It actually has real data. And it was published, which means it went through the review. And scientific reports, if you check, it's some sort of branch of, I think, of Nature, which is one of those key journals. And not only that, they actually said they published it today. Again, trying to evoke in the reader feeling compelled, which is an emotion, right? Feeling compelled to read it. It's really new. It's something not just funny, right? Odd about the lemon and risk, but it's published today. Read it. It's new and might be actually interesting. So discussions like this about what to leave in, what to leave out, again, simple, but enable you to actually evoke in students all these networks of meaning, so that they actually know that today doesn't mean today. Today means I want you to feel compelled to read it because it is so hot, right? That's what today means, right? So in that little networks, today is not on a Wednesday or on a Thursday. It is, I want you to feel compelled to read it. That's what today here means. It has an emotional effect. That's something that I always, ever since I've been involved in my own research, where I developed this model, reading for emotions, which is part of a greater set of tools. I got it from American scientists, but probably there are other people who work on it. I just got it from the Americans that talk about emotions, that, all our meanings, in fact, at the bottom of them are emotions. So our communications they act on our emotions, not on meanings. So it's very interesting to look at scientific report, because it shows to us scientific reports are not immune of emotions. So what else did I want to say to you today? So I don't want to spend too much time of actually analyzing what we have learned today in relation to the curriculum. That's something that we all should do probably next week, just to have a better summary of today's class. But certainly, if we look at critical and creative thinking capabilities, what we did look at how authors create texts and analyzed in order to actually find out what in terms of community relevance. Think to yourselves in terms of ethical and intercultural capabilities. What has the analysis shown us? We looked at two different perspectives on life in this fable, right? Like maybe two different cultures, two different ways of being. And what we learned, the denigrating one is not necessarily always, just because it's not our practice, it's not always actually the thing to do. People or perspectives, so let's say people, value different things depending on their own circumstances and conditions. But also in terms of the personal and social capabilities, what we did learn, that life is not just play, even if it is okay in a particular context, and our culture might be justifying this. In fact, maybe we could learn something from other people as well, so that we can look at life in the broader context of the things that people do, of the things that the world requires from us. So in some sense, we could say that maybe not the grasshopper, because the grasshopper has its own life cycle, but when we use the metaphor of the grasshopper and relate it to ourselves, we could actually conclude that how we construct the world today may change. But sadly, the change happens usually as a result of a distress, or of a challenge, when things stop working. Now, obviously, these are my faults. They not necessarily have to be the way in which you will word it with your students. Nonetheless, all our analysis really pointed out to this, and that ways in which we actually analyzed the way in which people communicate or impact on the audience, which is this using contrasts in order for the communicator have a emotional impact on those with whom they are interacting, right? So that's the literacy aspect of it. So the ways in which people use words to effect an emotional effect, you can analyze now this in more detail with your students. You could analyze now that's how it is, or it was done probably in the fable. We could now also look at other devices or other texts in which emotional tools are used for communicative effect. So we were using the poster, we now use the fable. You could use proverbs to make it shorter, so that there is still exploratory context, but you may have something simpler like a poster, something more complex like a text of a fable, and then you may have something shorter, still quite a complex form of a text, like, say, for example, a proverb. And we could analyze also now to show how these different personal cultural effects that we have actually identified, how language was being used to for these effects to result. So you can see we're not actually learning about grammar, we're not learning about what makes a poster, we're not learning about emotions in communication. What we are doing, we're integrating all these in order to better understand the transformative impacts of the text we analyze, the cultural and ethical impacts, and also how whether our tools were good enough to actually help us in those exercises of analysis. So one of the aspects of our curriculum requires us to actually, so if you want to compare different ways in which texts from different cultures articulate values and also use language, and our course, so what's needed also is actually access to texts from different cultures. So you could use here we use the European or Indo-European fable, let's call it this way, for argument's sake, but you could also use stories from texts of this kind, fables in inverted commas like this, from China. You could use some from different countries. From Asia, you could also use Aboriginal texts. So what I did, I don't know, I put in Google stories in Aboriginal English, and I got quite a good resource here from the Department of Education in Western Australia. So what's important, remember last week we were talking about it, that if our students are learning that there are different dialects or different ways of speaking English, and one way for our students to appreciate differences rather than think that only one of them matters or is legitimate, it is important to integrate these texts into our curriculum so that we can actually teach and learn and be fluent in the way how our Aboriginal people actually speak. So you can see there's a lot of stories here. Well, not a lot, but there are some. So some is better than none. So I clicked on one here, and this one is a collaborative book. In fact, I think children were creating these pictures so you can read about it, and you could actually see how the language in this particular text communicates emotions, and you could do all these forms of analysis we've done on the fable now in here. And also at the same time, children will, or students in your classes will learn how how language changes depending on the people or on the community, but appropriated in this case English. So you could do that. So there's a few of those texts. So that's very nice, right? So there are some resources that you could use. So yeah, I will finish here. And I will see you next week. And I hope there was something useful in this class for you. Thank you.